You've got to know every player personally, and you've got to customize how your approach is. And that's why I love the focus on individual improvement. And I think that is just a really big thing. And what we told our boys at the beginning of the season, and we're going to tell our girls this here in a few weeks, is only worry about yourself, because you are the only person that you can control. This is Ted Bishop along with Crystal Morse, and welcome to episode 8 of the High School Golf Podcast. Our high school boys season has been over with for a few weeks, Crystal, and we're not too far away from the start of the girls season, but let's talk a little bit about the past season that we just had with the boys.
Yeah, this would be a great time. I know you and I, Ted, are anxious to kind of recap our boys season. Obviously, we haven't done a podcast because our just running the golf course and coaching the boys, it was a lot, took a lot of time, and we now are at a point where we can recap the season, really think about our biggest takeaways from it, what we enjoyed, what we thought we learned as coaches, and that's what we're here to share today, is our biggest takeaways of the season. So as you know, Ted, we started the season, and back in February, even we talked to the guys about this, kind of joked about it at the end of the season. We have a young team. We had 3 sophomores in our top 5. And even though I knew the guys had a lot of potential, I wasn't sure what their scoring ability was going to be in tournament situations, especially big tournament situations. And so, I didn't have necessarily high expectations of our team, maybe scoring ability or things like that. Whereas I knew the potential was there, but I wasn't sure if they're going to be able to accomplish it. So it was a really fun season for us just to see that potential come out in them. And even though, we started at Harrison Hills and Rock Hollow and Hickory Stick, I think at the Trojan Classic is where we really kind of saw like, hey, these guys, they can put it together in a tough tournament. And so kind of from that point on, it was fun to see them really succeed, I would say, accomplishing their potential. And we had some really good scores. When we started shooting those 304, when we got down to 298, doing it on a consistent basis for us, I was thrilled with that. It was exciting. It was fun. The guys were coachable, and just turned into this great season.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that we've consistently done, and this was the 10th season that you and I have coached together. At the beginning of each season, we've always asked our players, boys or girls, all right, let's talk about team goals, let's talk about personal goals, all that kind of stuff. And this was the first time that we never did that. And, our approach from the very beginning was really about each player taking care of their own business. And if they collectively do that individually, then it will help the team have success. And just to familiarize any of our listeners with really what some of the high points were in our season, we won the Mid-State Conference. We won the Whiteland Invitational. We finished second in the sectional to Center Grove. We finished second in the regional at Champions Point to Center Grove. And then we went to the state tournament and we finished 18th out of 18 teams. And we'll talk about that one a little bit later. But our final regular season ranking was 14th in the state. And I felt like that was a very accurate ranking. But back to the point you were making, at the very beginning of the season, we were not ranked. We had 3 sophomores, a junior, and 1 senior in our lineup. And I'm not sure that as coaches, we really probably understood what this team could accomplish. And I think it really kind of giving ourselves some credit. That's why we approached the goal setting a little bit differently. And I felt like that really worked. And I think for our teams at Franklin, that's probably going to be a standard of how we coach going forward.
Yeah, we learn something every season, and I think this season was very instrumental in us being able to have these successful teams going forward. So this was the second team in 40 years in Franklin that has gone to the state finals. So it was a pretty big accomplishment, and I think what we can learn is, hey, we had this group of guys. What did we do that got them to achieve their potential? And not saying that some of these guys may not go to play college golf. Most of them are just very, they love playing golf. They love the game. They do enjoy competing. I mean, most of them enjoy the competition. But, we're not coaching high-level D1 athletes right now. That's not really their goals and their aspirations. And so I think the funnest part for us is being able to take these golfers and say, okay, what can we achieve?
And I would say this about Indiana high school golf, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about both boys and girls here just real quick. I think in boys golf, you have year in and year out, you have 7, 8, 9 of the same teams, and these are from very large schools they're always there. They're always there. They're always in the top 10. It's these teams that are going to compete for a state championship. And then you have all these other teams that are kind of like Franklin. And when it comes to this goal setting, and I get back to every time we would get our players together at the beginning of the season, the goals were always the same. We want to advance out of the sectional. We want to get to the regional. We get to the regional, well, let's make going to the state our goal. That would be a big deal, as you alluded to how few times Franklin had actually gone in the last 45 years. But the goal setting almost became the same old, same old. It was almost superficial, and I felt like that it just didn't really accomplish much, and there was nothing new. So that's why we didn't even get into that. On the girls' side of things, I think honestly, you've got 3 or 4 or 5 teams that are there every year, and it's the Westfields, the Carmels, the Zionsvilles, the Noblesvilles, and then you got the rest of us. And so our goals are always going to be different than Westfield's goals. Westfield's goal is going to be to win the state championship every year. Westfield is not going to think twice about getting out of the sectional, getting out of the regional. They're looking at the bigger prize. And I would say that the more times you go to the state tournament, that also helps shape your goals. Our girls team now has gone 2 years in a row, so I think we take a whole different approach when we get into regional action with our girls because we've done this. And that's habitual. It's easier to do. Going to the state with a team like we just had, we told the guys, hey, we're going up there for a golf vacation. Let's just enjoy the fact that we're there. And we kind of played like that the first day where we had nerves and had one of our worst rounds of the year. The second day, we kind of bounced back and beat 5 or 6 teams, but, really couldn't improve our finish much. And I remember telling my athletic director when we got home that, in the future with boys golf, you need to understand that a 12th place finish in the state finals is probably as good as Franklin is ever going to be able to accomplish. And that's okay because this is a one-class sport. It's what I would call a club sport, and you've got a lot of the larger schools in the state, and I really want to do a podcast on this, who are out there playing 2, 3, 4 teams every weekend, which in my opinion gives them a tremendous advantage in player development, and it hurts the rest of us because we don't have the numbers and we can't do that to get better. I think a lot of coaches that are listening to this podcast who are kind of in that same class of teams that we are can really relate to some of the stuff we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. Let's dig in here and talk about what you and I can do and what we do throughout the season that brings out the highest level in our players and their most potentials. So first of all, we really talked about just kind of managing the expectations and goal setting. That's from the very get-go. Those are going to be where you have to start. And so whether we're talking about the boys season or the upcoming girls season, those are the things that you really have to have as the foundation of your season. And I think that goal setting, where it's not a team goal necessarily, we're just taking it day by day. What can you do today to get better? What can you individually work on that is going to help your team in, the Franklin Invite or in this tournament we have coming up? Even if it's an after-school 9-hole tournament, let's just focus on that tournament and what you need to do to play your best and then take it from there. So kind of taking out those team goals a little bit, making it more individual, and then just managing the player expectations. And that's a big one because especially maybe with some of the guys, the expectations can get kind of high, and we have to kind of match those with their skill levels. Say, hey, let's look at your stats. Let's see where you're at, and let's kind of manage our expectations from there. If your up and down percentage is only 30%, that's what we really need to work on to get you where you want to be. So I think it's reining in the high school mentality because a lot of these guys just, they want to go out and they want to shoot par or better. But where are your stats and are you going to be able to do that?
Right. And I think the thing about high school golf that's true in almost every program, really, you've got your players are broken down into different categories. You've got your best players. Okay. And your best players are going to have different goals and expectations than what I would call your less developed players. Your older players who have been there, done that, are going to have far different expectations and really ability to accomplish some things that your younger players don't have. So I think the key for you as coaches is to be able to look at your roster and understand you cannot coach your 1 and 2 players maybe the same as you would coach even your 3, 4, and 5, and certainly your 7 through 10 or whatever you've got on your roster. You've got to know every player personally, and you've got to customize how your approach is. And that's why I love the focus on individual improvement. And I think that is just a really big thing. And what we told our boys at the beginning of the season, and we're going to tell our girls this here in a few weeks, is only worry about yourself, because you are the only person that you can control. And that starts with qualifying, starts with what position you are in the lineup. And even if you're a really good player, it starts with you understanding I can't worry about somebody else making 2 or 3 birdies in a row. I can only control what I'm doing. And I think we got this group of boys to really buy into that. And you and I use stats a lot, and we've talked about stats on these podcasts. The other thing that we did with the boys that I thought was outstanding is I updated the stats every week. And on Monday, I gave each player an envelope with their own individual stats. We did not share the team stats. If you and I were on the team, you didn't know that I was leading in driving, and I didn't know that you were leading in greens and regulation. Now, at the end of the season, when we have our banquet here next week, we'll share the overall stats with everybody, because at that point, I think it's important for players to understand where they stood as it relates to the team. But what we did was we used these stats, as you previously alluded to really help players identify where their areas of weakness were and where they needed to focus certain times during our practice. And what I thought was interesting, and you and I really haven't even talked about this, is as the season wore on and we had those range sessions on the back range, and the last hour was kind of free time, I loved seeing the players that needed work on chipping on their own go to the chipping area and work on chipping. It was like they were smart enough to read the stats, understand where they had to be. Those that needed to putt better did that. Those that putted and chipped well spent just as much time, because they understood that was a big part of why they were shooting the kind of scores that they did. So I felt like strategically not sharing those stats eliminated a lot of the internal comparisons that players might have had with each other, and it really set us up for some very effective practices and really player development.
Yeah, absolutely. The guys really owned it and did what they needed to do, during practice. And I think one of the big things that we did too was we set up either different stations during practice, or we tried to keep the players separate. Because and this is again knowing your team, you're going to have some players that like to socialize more than other players. And if you get a few players that like to socialize practicing next to one another, it can become a distraction. So just getting those players to work on their own in different areas was a big factor in having a successful practice for us.
There's no question. I mean, with these younger players, we had a couple of sophomores in particular that were, these guys are like glued together all the time. And probably at the midway point, one was left-handed, one was right-handed, and we had to just put them on different ends of the driving range, so they would take care of their business and work hard. And they did. And it obviously, it paid off a lot.
Yeah. They're all good friends. And I think that's the challenge. And the same with our girls team. They like to socialize. That's part of the sport, is the social aspect. We appreciate that. We respect it. But at the same time, we only have a limited number of time with our players. So we really have to say, hey, I get it, but we need to focus right now and worry about what we're trying to improve on. Let's talk a little bit, Ted, about how we coach during competition that could kind of help some other coaches out there. What we learned this year, what we found to be successful, and maybe just kind of how we approached. I know we've probably talked about it a little bit in other podcasts, but it's definitely worthwhile to touch base on and talk a little bit about how we coach during competition and what we found to be successful.
I love the coaching rule where we are able to have 2 coaches working with players during competition. I will say this. I do feel like at the high school level, I see a lot of coaches overcoaching, and I see just a lot of worthless information being passed on, a lot of verbal communication, in my opinion, that doesn't really need to take place. I mean, I think we effectively do most of our coaching during the week before our competitions, and then we do have a defined strategy when we get into the competitions. And the way we do it is I will pretty much handle the 1, 2, and 3 players in the lineup, and you'll handle the 4 and 5 players. Now, it just so happens that a lot of times these are the people that we're instructing as well. And we will set our lineup, particularly we did this with the boys, so that we can effectively have the players that we instruct and teach back to back. So it's a lot easier to manage 2 or 3 players in the lineup when they're right there together. So the order here at Franklin really doesn't mean a lot,
Right.
to us. You made a comment to me the other day, and this is kind of where I want to start. You coached our 4 and 5 players. These were 2 sophomores that performed tremendously and really were pivotal in the success that we had as a team. And these were guys that you taught. And you said to me, I didn't see a lot of other coaches back there coaching the 4s and 5s like we did.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about that. And I think there could be a lot of different reasons for that. Some of the coaches that obviously aren't PGA professionals may not know. They're like, I don't know what to say to them, or I don't know how to help them when they're out on the golf course. Because usually now these guys that we have are a little bit different, but when we go to the girls, it's going to be a different, kind of a different dynamic. Most of the time, your 4 and your 5 players are shooting higher scores. They're the scorers on the team that are going to be maybe they're harder to help in that sense for coaches that are not PGA professionals, because you're like, I just don't know how to help them. I don't know what to tell them. I don't know what I can do. And so I think that could be kind of an important topic. So when we're walking, I walked a lot with these players. And so a lot of these courses, I would just kind of bounce between our 4 and our 5, and I'd make sure I was in these pivotal spots. The first one being, a lot of times I was on the par 3s for them. And even walking, not even just the par 3s, but maybe the approach shots on par 4s and par 5s. So I found the approach shots to be very pivotal on holes. And what I would do is help them get their yardages. Basically, I would have my rangefinder. I would get their yardage, because what I found too, sometimes they wouldn't even they'd be shooting a tree, their yardages wouldn't be accurate. Or if they were shooting the pin, whereas I thought they needed to be shooting the front of the green, this is where we would talk through their yardage and really get them into a club that I thought was the best for them, because a lot of times they would overclub themselves and end up on the back of the green, just in a poor position. So getting the yardage for par 3s and approach shots was really key for these players, and just helping them decide where we want to hit it on this hole, not aiming for the pins all the time. A lot of times it's middle of the green, a lot of times it's front of the green, and just having the conversation with them of, it's better to be short. It's all right. So we're going to club down. And many times, more times than not, I would have them club down and it would work out very advantageous. Either they would put them in a great position. Whereas if they would have hit the club that they had in their hand, they were going to be over the green or just kind of on the back of the green.
I mean, you just said something, and I hadn't thought a lot about it until then, but I would say we had more issues with this particular boys team, top to bottom, 1 through 5, with players over clubbing or hitting the ball over greens than we did coming up short all season long. I mean, we made some numbers at times because our guys they blew it over greens. And so if you're coaching a team that is a better team that has good ball strikers, that's probably going to be what you're going to see. If you're coaching a team that's less talented, shooting higher scores, you're probably going to see those players consistently being short, underclubbing. And honestly, this was the best boys team we coached from the standpoint. I think we had 9 tournaments that we had 4 players in the 70s. And I realize, again, those top 8 or 9 teams that I referred to, that happens all the time with them. But for the rest of us, that's a rare occasion that you have that many players that shoot in the 70s. But if you're coaching better players, that's probably going to be something that you're really going to need to watch. And
we have resources here, which some teams may not have. But this is one thing with my players that I was coaching. I felt like I was really familiar with their yardages. So like throughout the season, I knew what club, like their distances that they hit on a stock shot. So, and even going into, I think it was after we played one of our practice rounds from either regional or state, we come back. And so we went and got the four-side GC quads, took them out on the range, because working on those par threes and say, hey, you really need to dial in what club you're going to hit on these par threes. And you need to know your carry yardage for these certain clubs. What is your 7-iron carry? And so I think I felt like I was really dialed in on their yardages, and which helped me club them out on the course. They were coachable, and we had a conversation about it. And there was many times where I talked them out of a club because I was like, I've seen you carry this, this distance. You need to hit this club, not the one you have in your hand, because I know you can do it. And I've seen you do it. So not only just telling them what to do, but telling them out of position of, hey, I've seen you do this before. I know you can hit this shot. This is the club you need to hit because I've seen it. So giving them that confidence too, not just telling them hit your 7-iron, or whatever it may be.
Well, the other thing, that I would say too, and you mentioned the par threes, and it just seems like a standard way that a lot of coaches coach during competition is they go to the par threes. And I would say for us, it depends on what course we're playing. It depends on the length of the par threes. It depends on the wind and any other extraneous conditions that might make club selection a little bit more difficult. But there could be some times where we might elect not to do a lot of coaching on the par threes because we feel like we're better served somewhere else on the golf course. And again, this gets back to players knowing their yardage and us as coaches having confidence that they're going to pull the right club, particularly when there's no wind. I guess that would be obviously the biggest thing. The other thing from a preparation standpoint on these par threes, I remember when we came back and the last day or two of practice before the regional at Champions Point, we had played there in an invitational. We had played a practice round there, and we were very familiar with what the yardage range was going to be on the par threes. And we made our players in practice put the ball on a tee and hit a lot of shots that would simulate par threes at Champions Point. And that's not something that I see a lot of players doing under any circumstances. And we've talked to our guys about this. I mean, par threes are going to be 4 of the 18 holes that you play. And people need to get comfortable hitting a ball off of a tee. And the range of par threes in high school golf for boys and girls will be pretty consistent depending on what sport it is. And so I would encourage you all season long to have your players spend a lot of time hitting those shots in practice. But there's a lot of effective things that I think need to happen. And you mentioned the second shots on par fives. I did a statistical analysis 2-3 weeks before the season was over with. And we didn't have a team that I would say, as good of players as they were, they did not make a lot of birdies. Probably didn't make as many birdies as you would think they might. They were all pretty good wedge players. So we got our players in the mode of saying, unless you have 165 yards or less into a par 5 on your second shot, or you're hitting anything over an 8-iron, if it was downwind, maybe the yardage range might be a little bit more. But if you're hitting anything over an 8-iron, we kind of fell back to that 80% rule that Mike Fleck talked about, the Ball State coach at our coaches conference a few years ago. If you can't execute this shot 80% of the time, then you better think about doing something else. And so our players laid up a lot the last few weeks of the season on par 5s. I don't know if we made that many more birdies by laying up, but I'll tell you what we didn't do. We didn't make double bogeys and numbers on par 5s. And that's what I felt like we were maybe doing at a point in the season where we were going for par 5s and 2. We weren't making that many birdies, and we were somehow making bogeys and double bogeys because we hit the ball in some trouble on those second shots.
Yeah, I think, getting the guys to realize your greens and regulations stat with a 5-iron or percentage is not going to be as high with a 5-iron as it is with an 8-iron. So if you're trying to hit this 4 or 5-iron into this par 5 and there's trouble all around the green, is it really worth it? To get them to lay up with an iron is not always the easiest thing to do, to convince them to do. But that's where the stats, I feel like, helped get our guys kind of in that good position. But again, kind of going back to those par 3s, I know after we took that state finals practice round, the guys that I was with, I just had this feeling. I was like, man, they didn't hit a lot of greens on these par threes. Those are the irons that we really need to work on. So in practice, that's where we had them practice off a tee, really practice with those irons and get their specific carry distances by bringing the quads out and getting those carry yardages. So that could just give them a little more confidence as they were going into those par threes, on that day. But Ted, I'll tell you another thing, that just talking about coaching those 4 and the 5 players. And one of the things that we saw a lot of is the rules, and the 4 and the 5 players being able to use the rules to their advantage, I think could be a huge focus for a lot of teams. So I found myself, just because I was walking with the players, I would be obviously helping my players with the rules, but there was a lot of other players that I was helping with rules as well. Or they may decide to take 2 club links, whereas I felt like, oh man, now I didn't say anything because I wasn't their coach. I didn't interject in that sense. But I'm like, man, if they just knew that they could go back on the line instead of taking these 2 club links, they'd be in a lot better position, or something to that effect, where knowing, or players taking the correct drop, I helped a lot with that. So I think the rules knowledge for the 4 and the 5 players, obviously all throughout the lineup, is important, but I just feel like more with those players, they could use the rules to their advantage more, getting them to understand the rules that could help them, because I do feel like I saw a lot of players out there cost them some shots just because they didn't know the rules.
Well, I would agree with that, but I would even take it one step further and talk about coaches that, rightfully so. You can't expect a lot of high school coaches to know the rules of golf maybe the same way that we would know them. And I mean, I'd use myself as an example. Hey, I was a rules official at 6 Masters. I officiated 2 U.S. Opens. But when these rules changed in 2019, I'm just not comfortable giving a lot of rulings. And so I've got Todd DeHaven, Mike David, and Gary Pratt, all certified rules officials, on speed dial on my phone, so that if I am in that position, I can always reach out to somebody that I know is going to at least verify the ruling that I think is correct, or they're going to answer my question if that's the case. And so the challenge for you coaches, finding some time on your own, and the USGA has got a lot of great short videos that you can watch online that will help you understand the rules better. And it's frustrating for me as a coach to have any kind of a confrontation with another coach about a rules situation, and it happens. But I have an obligation to protect the integrity of the field. It's not just my players; it's everybody playing. If I do see something that I don't think is correct, and I think one of the most confusing situations you get are these long grass areas that will play differently at so many courses. How courses are marked, and sometimes they're not marked, what I would call very concisely or very consistently, and that presents problems, particularly if you have blind shots off the tee where you can't see where a ball might have entered a penalty area, or you can't even see whether that area of the golf course is a penalty area. There's a lot of really confusing situations, but I would think if you're coaching a team that you feel like is going to compete at a higher level of competition, and I'm going to say that higher level is the regional or anything higher, then you have an obligation to your players to do a good job at knowing the rules as well as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. And the USGA app, I have that on my phone. I reference that all the time. Even if I feel like I know the ruling, I always look at that just to verify, because sometimes I'm like, well, I don't know. I can't remember if it's a 1-stroke or a 2-stroke penalty or what exactly it is. So I'm always keeping that USGA app on my phone at all times.
Well, let me just say real quickly one thing. This is pretty simple. If you're going to take relief in any situation that is a non-penalty relief, then it's 1 club length. Anytime you're going to take relief from a penalty situation, it's 2 club lengths. Mm-hmm. That's the benchmark.
And how many times have we told our players that? That's something we repeat all the time. And so, but I think having the consistency, so we start that conversation, the rules discussion in the very beginning of the season. Okay, I mean, these are sharp kids. We know they understand it, but I can't tell you how many times we've had to tell them, or even we're out there in a qualifying round or just a 9-hole match, and then they're like, hey, coach, we get a call on the cell phone, or they flag us over and they're asking us the question, guys, we've told you this. You can do this. Give them the confidence to do that on their own. We've told you this, 5 other times we've covered this. Obviously, rules is a big discussion, but, taking an unplayable lie is always the one that I feel like I help a lot of players with too. And I'm happy to help them. It's because it is knowing your options in that situation. And I think that's the big key is know your options, because that it can cost you shots. So if you don't know your options in a unplayable lie, you may be taking 2 club lengths from the ball when going back on the line would have been a much better option. Same thing with penalty areas. Being aware of, okay, is 2 club lengths my only option here? Or am I in the position, did my ball enter this penalty area in a position where I can go back on the line, and that's going to give me a lot better shot into the green? So those are just things that just being aware of, preaching that to your players, knowing your options is going to help them save shots out on the golf course.
Well, an easiest way to find your options, and this comes from a conversation I had with a rules official at the regional at Champions Point. As a coach, never be afraid to, or a player, tell your players this, never be afraid if you have a rules official at the event you're playing in to just simply say to the rules official, can you explain to me what all my options are? It's not the job of the rules official to come up to the player and say, okay, Crystal, here's all your options. But it's your responsibility as a player or a coach to ask that rules official what your options are. Boy, I saw a couple of painful situations, particularly at the regional, where there was a rules official right there, and the coach watched the player not drop the ball in the best spot that it could have been dropped in, and it had serious ramifications.
Absolutely. So Ted, hopefully the coaches can get some good stuff from this podcast, what we learned from our season, and just kind of the conversation about our boys' season. We have the girls' season coming up in a few weeks. We're going to start our kind of process of that. It's a whole different really approach and season just because we don't have as much practice time. We're really going right into tournaments as soon as practice starts. So it's going to be a little bit of different approach, but we look forward to, maybe continuing this conversation. And if coaches had some insight maybe into their season, we'd love to know maybe what other coaches learned from their season and kind of continue this conversation. So feel free to shoot your questions or your comments to Ted or I. My email is crystal@thelegendsgolfclub.com.
Mine is Ted Bishop, 38 PGA at AOL.com. And also, if you've got a topic that you really would like to see us discuss on these podcasts, and we have gotten a lot of great input from coaches, and some of the things that we talk about are a spin-off of those conversations, let us know, man. This is an interactive podcast.
Absolutely. We love talking to coaches. We love the networking. We love high school golf here in Indiana. And hope everybody has a great day. Enjoy the 4th of July weekend, which we're just shooting this podcast as we're going into it, and hope to see everybody out on the golf course and look forward to our next season.